I see your caboose, but
Yeah.
Put a hand up, Claire.
I'm like, you see my caboose? I'm like, okay. I mean, here we go. Jump aboard. Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
How to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, sign up for more support with meeting your needs with your weekly Universal Needs notes at theuniversalneeds.com.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone.
So how are we doing today?
We are doing a large coffee with a whipped cream topping today.
Oh, it's that kind of a
It
day
is
today.
that kind of a day.
Oh, tell us more.
We'll talk more about the lead up to that kind of day, but the kneading of the coffee, I actually have a situation that happened to me this morning that I think would be kind of valuable to share with everybody.
Cool.
Pre-coffee me is not as on point as post-coffee me.
I can see that. Yep.
So I went to go get my coffee this morning and I had a free voucher, and usually I save those for like the days that I'm like, it's a whipped cream and large coffee type of day.
I want to make the most of this free coffee.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I usually get like almond milk or oat milk or something in it, and that costs me like a quarter more.
Right.
Well worth it for that extra kind of cup in my cup. And the whipped cream topping, because I'm one of those people, whipped cream just makes things more fun for me. Like, just give me a cup of whipped cream and I'm like, oh, it's just...
You wait to see what happens when you throw a cup of whipped cream and some sprinkles.
Oh. It's like a sundae without the ice cream. I'm sorry. I mean, it makes me happy. I'm not
Nothing
sorry.
wrong with
I'm
that.
not sorry for getting excited over whipped cream.
As I was, we need to put into the queue of podcast to come an episode about the whole apology thing and the sorry not sorry. It's like sorry not sorry, hold on, you're apologizing for the fact that you're not sorry. So now, like, I have this thing now I say to somebody else I'm very close with, it's like, I'm not even going to pretend to be sorry. Like I'm not going to say sorry not sorry, I'm just not sorry. So yeah,
I find I catch myself more after doing the needs work that when I apologize, I'm like, I'll be like, actually, no, I'm not sorry for that.
No, not sorry at all. Anyway, back to your whipped cream and extra hit of caffeine this morning.
Yes. So I went up to the window and I gave my little code on my app, and I heard the it took it, and I owe more. And she's like, that'll be $2.15. And I was like, excuse me? She's like, $2.15. I'm like, for what? It's a free coffee. She's like, the almond milk. And I'm like, normally that's like a quarter. I was like, $2.15, that's like another coffee. And she just kind of looks at me, and I'm in my own energy, and all of a sudden
You're in your own little world up until this point.
Until that point, and I kind of feel like this energetic hit, and I look over and she's just kind of looking up at me like, please don't flip out on me. I mean, like, all of the energy coming out of her. I mean, I couldn't imagine working at a coffee shop on the morning shift.
Right.
Like, how many people haven't had their coffee or in their own little world who just don't care and aren't aware of the humanity around them and the interconnectedness that we have with people. So I look over at her and I'm like, I am so sorry. Like, I realize this is probably coming off that I'm like yelling at you about this. And I wasn't even yelling at that point, which is funny because my yell now and my yell before, like, but I didn't want her to take any of that. I was like,
but even just even as you were describing it, you're not yelling, but there's an edginess to the energy, an intensity to what you're saying, which can be taken, which can feel like an attack to some people because of the intensity you're coming with.
Well, my intensity was going at, a lot of the fast food places now actually show what your total is on a little digital screen. My energy, I was looking at that screen and I was like,
focused on that.
Yeah, I was like, screw you. Like, what?
Screw you, little screen.
Right? But she's right behind the screen.
Right.
So, and most people aren't putting their energy into being mad at the screen.
Right.
Like, so for her to be like, oh, that's obviously not at me. It's at the computer.
It's at the screen, right? It's at the computer. It's at corporate for deciding it's going to be $2.15 for this rather than a quarter or 75 cents or whatever.
Right. And I know that's just what was coming up on her computer. I also realized it was probably an error, and I could have been like, can you just check to make sure that's correct? With a line of cars behind me, $2.15 wasn't going to make a difference to me, and that was better.
This is still a good deal for the coffee you got.
It is still a really good deal for the coffee I got, and I didn't want to put an extra layer of anything on her day. And I'm like, I wanted to make sure that I'm aware just for next time, so that I don't get this kind of hit of like, oh, it's a surprise before my coffee. And she just kind of laughed, and I could feel like everything in her just go, think.
She's not going to start on me. This is not the customer that's going to be the beginning of the downhill of my day.
Right. And it was just, I drove away, and I'm like, I'm so glad I caught that energetic hit that I got from her, and it wasn't defensive.
And when you
her.
say, and I mean, just to explain what you mean when you say energetic hit, because I can imagine it sounds like someone's like, have you been punched in the face by some energy?
It's like some LARPing, like lightning bolt.
It's more like when we say energetic hit, like for us, it's like that's the us noticing that an energy has shifted. It's noticing that someone's energy has shifted from where it was to where it is. And what Serena means in this situation is that this girl's energy has probably shifted from being just like fairly neutral to, oh God, like it's like, shit, it's going to be one of these customers. Oh crap, this is really not what I need this morning. Like that. And so when she's saying the energetic hit, it's that hit of the energy being recognized in our system of like, oh, that's what's going, oh God. And cause sometimes it almost like wakes you up to the situation, because it makes you aware of how somebody else is feeling, how somebody else is reacting, how somebody else is processing what it is how you're behaving.
Yeah, it was literally, I was looking at that little screen, and I looked up, and I'm like, oh fuck. Like,
I'm so sorry.
We'll kind of refer to the energy as like the woo side of things, because a lot of people don't feel that in the way that we do, but it's also the realization of somebody's needs have been impacted, and it impacted my needs because of that interconnectedness.
Right.
I felt the impact to me just after I felt the impact to her, or maybe before, or maybe at the same time. Like, it was impacting both of us because I wasn't operating. Being mindful of the interconnectedness of the fact, like, she's literally repeating what's on the computer screen. I've worked in food service. Computers are horrible.
Right.
Horrible when it comes to, like, customer service a lot of the time. And I just felt like really kind of compelled to share that, because that one moment, like, I could have changed her entire day.
And the other thing I want to just say to this is that, we're very sensitive to energy. So I don't even need to see something happening with somebody, and I can normally sense, hold on, this shifted, something's going on. Like that's just how I actually shared a post on Facebook about that recently. And it was funny. One of my old clients responded, because I was like, it was something like my first language is energy. Like I can tell if it shifts. I can tell if it's off, blah, blah, blah. And one of my clients actually posted, it was like, this is so you. Like, this could not be more you. And I was like, I'll take that as a compliment. She's like, oh no, it's meant as a compliment. Absolutely. It's part of the reason I'm so good at what I do, is because normally I can sense things that are going off with people that aren't necessarily being spoken about.
It's meant as a compliment when she's not calling you out for trying to bullshit her.
Right.
Because you're lying about, you're like, yeah, I'm fine. And she's like,
Yeah.
And then it's like, I'm fine.
Fine.
Okay. We can pretend that's true.
Right. That's one of my favorite phrases.
Yeah. And then it's like,
someone's not ready to hear what's going on or ready to own what's going on, I'm like, okay, we can pretend that's true for as long as you need to before you're ready to get to the point where you're ready to realize, okay, this is actually, you're right, this is what's going on.
I can't mask. I can't hide.
And so while we are both very energetically sensitive, there are other things that other people might notice. Is that you might notice someone's body language shift. You might notice their muscles tensen. Tensen? Is that a word? Tense up?
I do not.
I don't know.
Tense up. I think tense up is
tense
the...
up. You might notice what happens with their line of sight. They might go from looking you in the eye to looking down or looking away. Like there are other things, like you don't have to be woo, you don't have to be energetically sensitive to be able to notice what's happening. Like their body language could go from open or with their or to kind of closed with their arms crossed across their body. Or
for her, she took a half a step back, which, I mean, I was in a car. The drive-through window, I don't believe it was necessarily a conscious, like, I'm in danger step back, but it was I'm getting a little bit away from you because, like,
there's some intensity coming off you right now that I don't want to deal with.
Exactly. Like, she was moving away from my intensity, but when I looked up, her face, it was fairly neutral, like, 9:50 in the morning. She's been through probably quite a few drive-through people and quite a few coffees and quite a few personalities. Yeah. And all of a sudden she was like, her entire face dropped, but it wasn't like, it was just enough where I'm like,
oh, there it is.
Oh, like, I know that I make that face when I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
That's my face is dropped, but I'm trying to still be professional face.
Yes.
It could even be.
I know that face.
Right?
Well.
We all know that face. We've all had that face. It could even just be simply like paying attention to their breath. Like if they're holding their breath, if they take a breath in, or if they like make like anything like that. These are all little indicators about how something might be impacting somebody that you can just start to notice. And then, as Serena did, like notice, oh, hold on a second, I'm actually impacting this person's needs with how I'm showing up right now. And how can I navigate through this in a way that I can basically apologize for, make amends for it, and leave them in at least the same state they were in when I arrived, rather than worse than when I got here.
And I mean, we've mentioned it in a previous episode, intent over impact.
Right.
It was not my intent to put my energy on the person serving me my coffee. But I did. And the impact was there, regardless of if I meant to or not. Like, obviously, I didn't mean to do that to her.
Right.
I wanted the computer to feel that. Like,
damn you, head office. You get this energy.
Right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could, like, just... that's just... that is a wormhole of...
You know what I just got in my head? I don't know whether anyone's ever seen this. There was an old Simpsons episode where they went for family therapy, and they're sat in chairs where they've got, like, buzzers where they can give, like, a little electric shocks to, like, the other family members. Or, like, it's like, oh, that hurt. Like, everything, and someone gets electric shocked. I'm like, I just got this image in my head of having a like one of those buzzers at the point where you go through the drive-through, and it like zaps the CEO, like, no, this is not good enough. Do better. Like,
that is an awesome. I mean,
immediate. No, obviously we don't want to do harm to other people.
Even just a vibration, like unhappy customer.
Yes, unhappy customer. Right,
unhappy customer, and have it go. So
there, or even it flashes up on their screen. Unhappy customer. Unhappy. So there's an awareness of what's going on. Like,
because nobody wants the CEO to know that the customers are unhappy.
Imagine the amount, like, especially with where things are at right now. Can you imagine how many notifications they would get a day? I mean, like, it would be like, bing, 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 bing. Like, they never get anything else done.
But then maybe they'd realize what's happening to their staff, because if they're getting bing, 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 their staff is getting like boom, 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 boom,
right,
boom.
Exactly. And therefore it's like their job to do something. I don't know. That's interesting idea. I'm not sure that our corporate clients would go for that as a strategy, but it is something about having that awareness of what's really going on at the ground level. And that's one of the things that we often experience, that when we're working with corporate clients, is that what the executive suite are aware of and what the line level are aware of are very different. And actually we want to make sure that we're supporting all of the levels in the organization and getting their needs met.
Yeah, we'll definitely be going deeper into that one, just because the levels of awareness in corporations, there's a lot of segmenting purposefully.
And there's a lot of deliberate, like, willful ignorance of like, I don't want to know what's going on because then I'm going to have to do something about it, kind of thing. So anyway, like, good story. I like that. I went in a weird direction.
When does it stay in a not weird direction? Like, if we have an unweird episode, you should be like, are those ladies okay today?
Yeah, I'm like, should we check on them? Like,
They made a little too much sense.
There were no weirdness. There was no woo. There was no laughter. There was no swearing. What's going on? Like,
have we filmed an episode like that yet?
No, we haven't. That's like, as the person who edits these episodes, I can pretty much categorically say no, we have not. But I think that it's really important now for us to start to transition into what we're going to talk about today, because today we start the first in our guilt and shame series. Now, this is not always necessarily a kind of fun or comfortable topic to discuss, but it comes up so frequently, and it is very, very much related to our needs. So we wanted to just have this series to expand a little bit, firstly on what is the difference between guilt and shame, but also start to look at how these things are used to manipulate us, how we're told maybe things are one thing when actually it's something else, how we internalize these things and how it impacts our needs by doing so, because it's by being aware of these things that we can then do something about them. And I'm not going to speak for you, but I know that for me, guilt has been something that's been very, 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 very present through a lot of my life. It's something where guilt has often been a driving force behind decisions I've made or decisions I haven't made, or I've made decisions that have been unwise and felt that hit of guilt, but it's been more than just guilt. It's not been guilt I've been experiencing, it's actually been shame. So first things first, what is the difference? What is the difference between guilt and shame?
I didn't even know there was really a difference until we started talking about it. And I was like, oh, that's like guilt. And just like, Claire was like, no, that's shame. And I'm like, like just mine. Oh, that would have been a perfectly timed, I think
glitter bomb.
Second.
Oh,
I thought you spitting your water. I think if I did it a second, like, but yeah. You know, I was thinking of glitter this morning and I'm like, it's not the time. When is it not the time for glitter? Anyway, back to guilt and shame. What is the difference between guilt and shame?
So there's a massive, massive difference between guilt and shame. And it looks at the different levels that we are speaking about. Like, where are we focusing our attention? Guilt is, I've done something wrong. So there is a behavior that I've done. Maybe I've said or not said something, I've done or not done something. There is something I have done, and that thing that I have done is wrong. We're focusing on the behavior level, because there are these different kind of layers of ourselves. Like, we've got our identity, we've got our beliefs, we've got our values, and we've got our behaviors. There's like just 4 of those levels. Go ahead.
Would you say that the example this morning, if I had driven away and just gone about my merry way, I would have had a feeling of guilt having gone away from that situation. It was
yes. You were aware of the fact that you had done something that had impacted this other person, and that feeling of guilt is, I've done something wrong. We'll go into it in a little bit more detail in a minute, and we'll go into guilt in a little bit more detail. We'll go into shame in a little bit more detail. But primarily, guilt is there is a behavior, there is something I've done or not done, and that was not cool, that was not okay, and I feel bad because I've done this thing that's not okay. Shame is something entirely different. Often the two get used interchangeably, but shame is, there is something wrong with me. There is something wrong at the identity level. So we were talking about the fact there's identity, beliefs, values, and behaviors is just 4 of the levels of the self. When we're looking at the behavior level, for a start, one, it's easier to do something about that. It's easier to change something at the behavior level, because it's like, I've done this, I want to do something different. This is the reason that when we're talking about disciplining children, we're going to come back to, if I forget, can you help me remember disciplining children? I want to do that after we've gone into more depth about the difference between guilt and shame, so that I can use that as an example. So shame is, there is something wrong with me. That is at the identity level. That is who I am. There is something wrong with who I am. And it's far harder to do something about who we are than it is about the things that we do and don't do. So let's go a little bit deeper into each of those. So when we're talking about guilt is when you have genuinely harmed another human being, or even another sentient being, like it could be an animal or what have you. But it's like, we've know we have caused genuine harm with something we have done, with a behavior that we have engaged in, or something that we haven't done. For example, like that we feel like we know there was something actually it would have been better for us to have acted in that situation rather than not acted. So when we're focusing on that behavior and we're recognizing that we have impacted another person or another sentient being, what happens, especially like focus on it being another human being at the moment, your humanity kicks in. Your humanity kicks in, and it's this internal feeling of I'm a human being and that other person is a human being, and I wouldn't want to have experienced what that human being has experienced. So I don't want that other human being to experience what that human being has experienced. It's like I get to see you as a human being and my humanity. But that is this, as I said, we've talked about it on innumerable occasions about the humanity is our interconnectedness is our humanity. It's that common link that's like I'm a human, you're a human, and I don't want you to experience harm. I don't want to experience harm because I know how it would feel if I was experiencing harm because I'm a human being too, kind of thing. Now, the thing about it is that when we have done something that has genuinely harmed somebody else, our humanity kicks in. And what it does is it creates this positive internal motivation to honor your humanity, which is connected to your value need. That feeling bad when we do that, that is what is going to keep us in alignment with our humanity going forward. Because what it's going to do, it's like, I feel bad when I do this to somebody else, so I'm not going to do that anymore. And so it's that when we feel that guilt, it is us working exactly as we are meant to. It's like, actually, I don't want to do that. By doing that to this other person, I feel bad. And that I feel bad, we want to feel that. Because by feeling that acts as our internal motivation to not do that thing again, to do things to ensure that we don't do that thing again, to learn and do better. So it also then that will also prompt us to make a genuine apology in that situation. So it's like, oh my goodness, I see what I've done to you. And if you can go, if you want, you can go and look back at the apology series. I think it's around episode 16 where we go through the steps to an apology, but I will put it in the show notes. And you can go through and make that genuine apology where you're going to acknowledge what you've done, you're going to address the situation, you're going to make amends, you're going to act to avert further harm was obviously the first step, you're going to avoid it happening again in the future, you're going to learn and grow and all these sorts of things. That will come, it'll be more genuine if it's coming because you feel the impact of what you've done to this other person. And when you've made amends and acted to avoid repeating it, the guilt has served its purpose, so it's no longer needed. So that guilt then dissipates because the guilt is our internal system saying, hold on, we've done something that is out of alignment with who we want to be as a human being. And by coming back into alignment with who we want to be as a human being, that guilt starts to dissipate. And by healing that impact to the other person, or doing what we can to heal that impact and doing what we can to ensure I'm not going to repeat that impact, that guilt then slowly dissipates over time. It's not going to be like an immediate, oh, done, fixed, check, bye-bye guilt, because we're still going to feel the remnants of the fact that we've impacted somebody else, but that is going to be allowed to slowly dissipate.
And that's, we talk about like processing through your emotions, not circumventing and going around. And part of the guilt process is if you don't do something to put yourself back in alignment, to make amends, to be interconnected with humanity,
right, to be in alignment with who you want to be,
then you're going to start compounding. That guilt doesn't go away if it's not processed, if it's not rectified. You can be like, oh, I feel bad about that, and then go on about
your business.
What she said. Apparently I haven't drank enough of my coffee. But it's going to start compounding, and eventually then all of a sudden you start feeling like you feel guilty more often. You feel guilty, like the intensity of the guilt that you're feeling is more, and that's because it's compounded, and it might be things that you don't even remember. But eventually as you start processing, you'll be like, oh, I remember when I did that. Oh. Okay, I can't make up for that with this person in this situation, but what can I do to anchor it in myself to make sure I'm not going to do it again? And is there a way I can still make amends?
Yeah, I can do something to create some kind of healing from this situation. So that's when we're talking about guilt. And this is the thing, is that guilt is actually a really helpful tool. Guilt actually can be a really great ally in us learning to be better human beings, to be more decent human beings. Because when we have that guilt that comes up, it's like, oh, okay, let's not do that again. And let's make right the fact that we did that in the first place. So it helps us to become better human beings, because it connects us with our humanity, and our humanity, which, as I said, is part of our value need, is then acting as our guide for how we want to show up in the world. And that is a very, very helpful tool. So guilt, if we learn how to listen to it, how to respond to it, how to process it, and how to act on it, can actually be an incredible ally. Even though a lot of people, I'm sure, if you felt guilt, you're like, how is this a good thing? Now, I'm going to question whether you're actually experiencing guilt or whether you're actually internalizing it as shame. So shame, as I said, is something entirely different. Shame is there is something wrong with me. And the issue with that is that shame really is a very destructive force. There is very little constructive that ever comes out of a shame. And I'm using that absolutely and deliberately. It's very, very, very rarely is it ever helpful, because it doesn't serve us to see ourselves as the problem. Because the thing about it is that, as I said, when we're looking at the levels of self, it's much, much easier to do something to shift our beliefs or to shift our behaviors than it is to shift our identity, like who I am as a person. And if you internalize, I am a bad person, I am a angry person, I am a I don't know, lazy person, like as soon as you make it who you are, that makes it far more difficult to shift. And in my experience, I have never experienced a situation or seen an experience with somebody where shame has led to positive change. Because what it tends to do is it tends to cause this self-destructive cycle. And what it does is it tends to lead to self-harm, which is that, and even if that self-harm is like, I'm this terrible person, I've done this terrible thing, gets then shifted to I'm a terrible person. And it ends up creating this shame spiral where it's like, and what ends up happening is that we tend to withdraw from other people when we're experiencing shame. So actually what we do is we compromise our needs even more, because we pull back from the community and the connections and the places that can actually support us through those things. And it tends to lead to self-harm. And that self-harm can be, oh, I don't believe I'm worthy of X. I don't believe I'm deserving of this. So we don't do the good things for ourselves. We don't take care of our needs. And a lot of the time, what it can tend to do is, because this shame is a feeling that we're desperately trying to get rid of, we don't want to experience. It's actually one of the trigger points for a lot of addictions. Because at the root of every addiction is an unmet need. At the base of every addiction normally is that we are experiencing something that we don't want to experience, or we're not experiencing something that we do want to experience. So from the shame point of view, we're experiencing shame, we don't want to experience shame. And so what we do is we use the addictions as a way of trying to numb that and not feel that thing, rather than recognizing actually it was never, this is not something that is our shame to carry. Maybe we've done something that we want to feel, that we do feel guilty about, but then if we focus on the behavior, we can actually do something about that and shift and move in a positive direction. And when I'm talking about addictions, it's really important to also just note here that whenever we speak about addictions, we're not just talking about the quote unquote standard addictions that most people talk about. So we're not just talking about drugs, alcohol, gambling, those sorts of things. We're also talking about things like the socially acceptable addictions. So things like food, shopping, exercise, social media, coffee. There's all kinds of different things that we don't see as being problematic. We don't see them as being addictions, but we have an addictive tendency around them, watching TV, playing video games, all those sorts of things, because they're a way of trying to numb a situation that we don't want to feel, or they're a way of trying to feel something that we don't already feel. Now, it's very important for me to just make a quick caveat here, that when we're talking about shame, when we're talking about addictions, is that the challenge here is that shame feeds addiction, addiction feeds shame, feeds addiction, feeds shame. And it's like a downward spiral.
It's dizzying.
Yeah, it is. And the thing about it is that a lot of the time, addictions have been a coping mechanism before how to deal with unmet needs that we haven't known any other way of dealing with. We don't know how else to deal with it. And so we found something that in the short term creates temporary relief or temporary pleasure. We use Gabor Mate's definition of an addiction. I don't have it in front of me, but that's one of the components of it, is it creates temporary relief or temporary pleasure, but is hard or very it's impossible or very hard to give up despite long-term negative consequences. And the thing about it is that so often what ends up happening is that we found this thing to cope with the situation that we're in the absence of knowing another way of doing it. So it's very, very important, if you have an addictive tendency around something, is not to shame yourself for that, is to recognize this was an unmet need or a combination of unmet needs that I didn't have another way of doing it. And actually, I'm pretty incredible because I found a way of coping with that. It's not actually a long-term strategy that works for me, and it's harming me as well as it's helping me to cope. And so maybe there's a different way of getting those needs met that's actually going to be more supportive, and that's where we talk about harm reduction in the context of addictions, because we don't want to the most important thing is to reduce the impact to our unmet needs, or reduce the impact to our needs. We want to reduce the harm and maybe look for other ways of meeting those needs as well. But it's really important that, because what ends up happening is that there is so much shame often associated with addiction because of the stigmas attached to addiction, is that a lot of people feel shame. It's like there's something wrong with me, and actually there's not. In most of those situations, there isn't anything wrong with you. You are a human being who has had unmet needs, and you haven't been taught any other way of meeting them, and this is your coping strategy for doing that. But because there's so much shame associated with addiction, what happens is that someone uses an addiction as a coping strategy, normally because of shame, and then what ends up happening is that because they've got an addiction, they feel shame about the addiction, so they layer on more shame, which means that they need more of the coping strategy, so they end up using more of the addiction, and they get into this kind of vicious cycle where it ends up kind of going down and down and down and down. So the most important thing is just to acknowledge that this is a coping strategy that you have used for unmet needs, and maybe there is another strategy that would serve you better and not have the negative consequences that the coping strategy you found in the short term in the absence of anything else, that it doesn't have those same negative consequences. So yes, there's a desire to learn different ways of coping, and that there are other ways of getting those same needs met. But it's really important to notice the difference between when am I feeling guilt about something and when am I feeling shame about it. Like, when am I feeling guilt? I've done this thing. Okay, I've done this thing. What can I do about this thing that I've done? How can I make sure I don't do that thing again? And I am a bad person, or I am a terrible person, or I'm an awful person. There is something wrong with me. I am broken in some way. The second we get into that space, we're going to drop into that shame spiral. And when we drop into that shame spiral, we're going to go further and further. It's going to lead to more self-harm, whether that self-harm is compromising of needs, which then increases our need for the coping strategies, whether it's withdrawal from communities, which increases the need for the coping strategies, whether it is just simply in that, oh my goodness, I've done this thing, I've got this coping strategy, I'm shaming about the coping strategy, oh God, I'm going to go back to more shame, which means I've got more need for the coping strategy, she says, hitting the sound screen, and down and down and down and down.
I also feel like there's, as with many things, there's a compoundedness to the shame cycle as well. Mm-hmm. That once you feel shame for one thing, you kind of start identifying, like you start compounding it yourself. You're like, oh, I'm shamed on this level, and this, and this, and this. And then you find all the ways that you've been shamed, feel shame. Like, right. It seems to be, it will intensify if you don't address it. And if you don't recognize, actually, a lot of shame is put on people from other people. It's like that. No, like, you can tell me I'm not a good person. Well, someone could say that to you, but it's not. It's like I may have made a mistake. I may have done something that's wrong. But there is a difference between I've done something wrong and I'm a bad person. Right.
Yeah. And the thing about it is that when you talk about that, our brains have this amazing ability that when we believe something, they look for further evidence of the fact that that's true. They look to back it up. So if you have that, one of the things that Serena's speaking to is like, if you believe I'm a bad person, your brain will look for all of the other evidence of the fact that you're a bad person and compound it. Oh God, yeah, look, you're a bad person because of this. You're a bad person because of this. You're a bad person because of this.
Your brain's going to try and prove it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it will look for, and here's the thing, is that it will find situations And even though that's not evidence of that, it will view it as evidence of that because that's the lens through which it's seeing things. So it's like so again, like you could look at a whole bunch of things that you could feel guilty about because I've made this mistake and I really shouldn't have done that, or I would prefer to not done that. If you're looking at it through a guilt lens of like, okay, what have I done and who do I want to be in the world? I want to be somebody who actually lives in alignment with my humanity and I want to make these things right. Those then become opportunities to then learn and grow and improve. Those exact same things could be internalized with a shame lens where it's like, oh, look, I'm a bad person because of this. Oh, and look, that makes me a bad person and that makes me a bad person. And we've got so conditioned into this good person, bad person kind of dynamic rather than recognizing we're all human beings and we are all going to make mistakes. We are all going to do things wrong. And it's how we relate to those situations and how we make those better. It's how we grow from them. It's how we improve and how we prevent doing those things in the future. That's the testament of our character, not making the mistakes in the first place. But the issue we have is as a society, there tends to be this like, oh, I've done this thing wrong. Oh, that makes me a bad person. And as soon as you create that self-label of like, I'm a bad person or I'm a lazy person or I'm an awful person or whatever, or I'm an unkind person, all of a sudden you're going to end up finding that you're going to get into a pattern of noticing more instances which seem like they prove that that's true. And actually, they probably just prove that you're human. And if you use them through a guilt lens of like, oh, hold on a second. Yeah, I did this thing wrong. And yeah, I want to learn how to do better and not do that thing in the future. The same exact things can be kind of painted in those two directions. And going back to the example that I was talking about at the beginning, when it comes to like disciplining children, it's why a lot of people say when you're disciplining a child, you never say to them, and again, never is, I'm using that as a deliberate absolute here. You never say to them like you're such a bad girl or you're such a bad boy or you're such a bad person. That you're instead what you do is rather than focusing on the identity level, that you focus on the behavior level. Like you hit this person and that we don't that's not a kind thing to do. Like, and there's different ways of approaching it, and I'm not suggesting that this is how you would do it, but you can have a conversation then about like wanting, like, would you like people to be kind to you, and therefore do you think it would be nice if you were kind to other people? We're like, can you see how if you would like someone to be kind to you, that it would be, therefore it would follow that you would want to be kind to other people so that they'd have the same sort of, so you can open a dialogue around these things when it's around behavior. As soon as you start to create an identity for somebody, especially with children, because they are sponges for this stuff, as soon as somebody is like, oh, this is who I am as a person, they're going to start operating in alignment with that. So if you label them as a bad person, they're going to view themselves as a bad person. And once they view themselves as a bad person, it's then much harder for them to shift that rather than, oh, here's this thing that one of the things we talk about in terms of that comes up quite frequently in the context of needs is understanding how we relate to children's needs, and we talk about attachment parenting. And with attachment parenting, there is this difference between principles and rules, and attachment parenting comes from a principles-based approach, whereas rules are these outside things that are put on us, and normally the rules are the things that are used to shame people. It's like, here, it's not just you did this thing and it broke the rules, therefore you broke the rules, therefore we want you to rectify the fact that you've broken the rules. A lot of the time, the hop, skip and a jump, whether it's said explicitly, is you broke the rules, you're a bad person. Whereas actually principles are things that normally are created by the family together, including the children. It's like, how do we want to be as a family? What are the things that we would like to do? And the principles are, so the rule would be, don't hit your brother. The principle would be, we want to be kind to each other. So we could have and again, everyone has a hand in deciding those principles because you want them to have internal investment into it. It's like, this is what I want to do, not something I'm being told to do. Like, what do I think is a good way of being? How do I want to be as a person? And then if they hit their brother, that then becomes a conversation. Like, okay, so firstly, you hit your brother. Do you think that's in line with the principles that we decided we wanted to do? Like we said that we wanted to be kind. Do we think that that's kind? But then more importantly, you can then have a conversation. So why did you hit your brother? what was going on in that situation, what needs were not being met in that moment. Okay, what's the other way of getting those needs met? Was there something you could have said in terms of having a conversation with them? Could you set a boundary with them? If that didn't work, could you have come and called a parent? Like there's a bunch of different layers to this. But when it comes to disciplining children, a lot of the advice is that you focus on behavior rather than identity, because behavior is much easier to shift. Behavior is where we talk about guilt. It's like, oh God, I've done the thing I shouldn't have done, or haven't done the thing I should have done. That is much easier to address and rectify versus I'm a bad person, because there's very little that you can do about that, because it becomes part of your identity. That's much harder to shift.
And I would say this kind of brought up some thoughts for me in the sense of giving children those identity labels. Thinking of where we're saying you are.
Yes.
I used to get called a bull in a china shop when I was a kid. I was clumsy. I was big with my arms. I was big in my stature. I mean, like I'd knock some shit over. Like it's just,
Me too.
yeah. And I wasn't like I was ever trying, and I got more mindful of it, but I was a bull in a china shop. So many people told me, you are this. And it's like, and I carried that for a long time. And I was clumsy for a really long time. And then I realized it was actually, luckily, long before I met you, I'm still clumsy. Like I am, like my head. Well,
I'm going to pause you there. Are you clumsy, or are you sometimes sometimes does clumsy things?
Well, it is the second. I'm like, no, I'm clumsy. Well,
and this is exactly what we're talking about.
But for so long, it was like, that's who she is. Oh, Serena's going to fall. Like, I mean, you can ask if there's people listening at different stages in my life. They're like, oh God, when did she change? Like, I still fall.
Right.
Because I am a person who sometimes falls. I'm a person who sometimes knocks something off a shelf accidentally.
Right.
But it's no longer who I am. Like,
Is that true, given what you just said?
It's not who I let myself identify. I don't identify my, like...
You just did a moment ago.
Well,
it's not
shit.
how you, it's not, and it's like, it's not, and the reason I'm saying this is not how you want to identify yourself, but there's obviously still some of that conditioning in there. I had the similar thing with like, I was bossy. I was bossy as a child. Now, sometimes I was assertive, and sometimes I assumed a leadership position within what was going on. And sometimes I might have been behaving pushily to the other children. Maybe I wasn't asking and checking in with them. But there's a big difference between looking at the behaviors that are going on and putting that label on somebody. And it's interesting how even with the amount of work that we've done, there are still things that someone can say to me, oh, you're bossy. And I'll pause and I'll be like, okay, because of the amount of work I've done on this, what I will tend to do is like, what was I doing? What was I saying? What was I not doing? So I will then start to shift that into what were the behaviors I was doing? How is somebody like they're trying to put me in a box. As Serena would say, fuck your box. I'm not going in a box. But it's interesting how we've been put into those boxes, and sometimes we find ourselves in them still. And it's like, no, I'm not. No, that's not my box. In actual fact, I did things that might have gone alongside the box, but that's not where I live. But it's interesting how even just in this conversation, you still described yourself. And it's such a habit of us to do. In one of the previous episodes, I can't remember which one it was, but you described yourself as an asshole. Like, I am an asshole. No, sometimes you act in that kind of a way, but there's a difference between owning that as the label, which is what then is a very, very short hop, skip and a jump to shame from there, versus focusing on the behavior. And I'm only doing this with Serena live on the podcast because I know, one, she won't mind, and two, because it shows how prevalent this is, even for people who've been doing this work for quite some time.
And how it sneaks up. Like,
yeah, like, you don't even notice it.
Oh, wait, yeah. Oh, God, in the same sentence. Like, I mean, and that's how our brains work. And it attaches and it's like, no, that's not me. That's sometimes what happens in my world.
Right. And it's those identity labels that we put on ourselves or that other people put on us are the express way to shame. Because so very, very rarely are those positive. And what we do is we look at those and we go, oh yeah, I am that kind of person. Versus, actually, no, that is something I might do it frequently, but that doesn't define me as who I am. I can still make choices. And here's the thing, is that this is where it compromises other needs, because if we're not acting from choice, if we're acting from those labels unconsciously without realizing that we're doing it, we're actually disempowering ourselves. We're compromising our personal power need. Because I know, I said it on a recent podcast about the Meredith Brooks song, Bitch, of like, I'm a bitch, I'm a lover, I'm a child, I'm a mother. Like, I know I have all of these, and I know I have a bitchy side of me. I know I could be that very easily, and I choose not to be. And it's not, and again, like I know there are people from my past who would say she's a bitch. I know that. There are some times where I've been mean to people many, many years ago. Really shitty strategy for trying to get my needs met. I knew I wasn't doing the right thing at the time, and I've not been kind or pleasant to those people. And those people, I can understand why they would describe me as a bitch. I have done my work now to know I have that capacity inside of me, but actually I'm choosing how I be. And you know what? There are some times when I've got a million things going on, and I might have a little moment where a little bitchy comes out, and it's like, okay, I had a little bitchy moment. There's a difference between I had a bitchy moment. Okay, I feel bad about that bitchy moment because it's impacted somebody. What can I do to rectify that bitchy moment? What can I do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Probably take care of my needs better is actually the simple solution for that one. But there's a very big difference between, okay, I've had a little bitchy moment and I'm a bitch. And that the second that we put that on as an identity, as I said, it's the express way to shame of like, hold on a second, there is something wrong with me. So what we want to do is that when we want to notice that, one of the antidotes to this is start to notice when we have this, and it comes up a lot. We talked in episode 39 about negative self-talk at the beginning, the toxic positivity podcast. When we get into that negative self-talk, when we start to notice that, the thing about negative self-talk is actually it tends to be a shame spiral. Negative self-talk is negative because it is actually creating that self-harm. It is creating that shame. It's like, oh God, and very rarely is that, because sometimes it might start off with the stepping stone that could lead to guilt or shame. That's like, oh, I did this thing. The next step from that, the next stepping stone we hit normally determines which direction we go. Like, I did this thing. Okay, what do I want to do about the fact that I did this thing? That's where we start to move to guilt. I feel really bad about the fact that I did this thing. That might even be the second step. You still maybe haven't bridged off, like splintered off at this point. I feel bad about this thing. Okay, what am I going to do about this thing? How did it impact this other person? What can I do about the fact that it impacted this other person? How can I make it right about the fact that it's impacted this other person? What can I do to minimize my risk of doing that again? That's the guilt splinter. But that I did this thing, I feel bad about this thing, I'm a bad person. That is, or I'm a blank person, whatever that is, whatever the blank is, fill in the blank. That tends to be that beginning of that shame spiral, and that negative self-talk normally is where we've not splintered onto the what can I do about this situation? What do I want to do to make this right? What we've done is we've hopped on the expressway to shame, where it's like, I'm a bad person. How could I have done this? Why did I let this happen? Blah, blah. And normally that negative self-talk is in and of itself a shame spiral. So once you notice you're in that negative, like if you catch yourself doing negative self-talk, this is where we want to go. Like, let's go back to the source. What did I actually do? What did I not do? It's okay to feel bad about the thing that I did, but what am I going to do to make it better? And that's the point where we can then utilize, we can shift tracks. We can shift from this shame spiral onto the guilt track, and that moves us in a constructive direction.
And one way to also do that is see where this where the identifier is coming from. If you're feeling it within yourself and you're on your own shame spiral, that's one thing. If somebody
that's where you can do that jumping track that I just talked about.
Yes,
go ahead.
You're in the position of choice. When somebody tells you that's what you are, I could say Claire could probably be like, this is who Serena is.
Mm-mm. And but here's the thing, I wouldn't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's very few people who I feel like could accurately do that in my life. It'd be somewhere close, but I don't think any of those people would ever really do that.
No.
Like,
And we might do it in a more positive light, but
Yes.
even that, like, it's like saying that you're a kind person. You are a kind person, but actually, again, like if you use that label of I'm a kind person, I get to say, oh look, I'm a kind person.
Well,
Whereas
Claire thinks I'm a good person. So.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like almost like, okay, rather than actually, I really appreciate how kind you are. Like the things that you do that are kind, like how thoughtful you are. These little things like this, like I tend to focus more on behaviors, both when we're looking at things which I'm giving feedback on, which I'm like, I would really appreciate it if we could shift this. And the things that like, oh my God, I love this side of you, because that's how it becomes easy for somebody to identify how to do more of those things. They want to be more of that. It's like, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. Like, it's really easy to say I love you to someone, but I
think we were having
a conversation. Like pop screen. Like, it's very easy to say I love you to somebody, but actually, like you're a lovely person. Well, what makes me a lovely person? Like, what are the things that you see? Those are the things I appreciate, because it's like, oh, okay, that's something that's really appreciated. I can do more of this. If I want to be more of that person, I can do more of those things. If I want to be less of this person, I can do less of these things. If I know the specific things that I'm doing that are actually creating that perception. Sorry, I jumped in the middle there. I know you were in the middle of a track, but
which is completely gone. But that brought me to another one is the kind of identifying with, we're talking about the shame spiral and that kind of thing, but the positive, I mean, they're identifying anybody as anything can lead to unmet needs. Their unmet needs, your unmet needs, because somebody attaches to the nice, like what's coming to my head is the nice guy.
Oh yeah.
And the nice guy is always the nice guy, but I'm a nice guy. Oh, that was a one-off. I'm a nice guy. And it's like, yes, and you can't
rest on the fact that you've identified yourself as a nice guy. Right. You have to continually, like, that's something you do, not something you're labeled as once and there it will always be forever.
Right. Like 90% of the people that I'm in relationship with may be like, oh, she's a great person. And then there might be 10% that's like, I beg to differ.
And it's like how it's like how you show up and the things you do that matter most. The track that you got distracted from when I interrupted you was about noticing whether that's an internal shame reference that you're putting on or whether it's somebody else's.
Yes.
And whether somebody else's. Do you want to say any more about that, or do you want me to add to it?
If you have something to add, because I'm still running after that train. I see your caboose, but yeah. Put a hand up, Claire.
I'm like, you see my caboose? I'm like, okay. I mean, here we go. Jump aboard.
I'll save you from that internal dialogue in my head. It was about to get weird.
There was like half of that was about you can see my caboose. The other half was I'm putting out the hand you said from the train, jump aboard of the train. Oh my God. This is also a spiral that could end up in a very, very not so great place. So I'm going to jump off it. So anyway, the thing is about coming back to whether that shame label, that identity label is being something that you're creating for yourself, is where you kind of splinter off and you can be like, oh, hold on. No, let's go back to what I did. How do I get on the guilt track? How do I get on because the guilt track is the improvement track.
And you can always you can always stop where you are and be like, okay, I realize I'm in shame. How do I get to guilt?
Well, and sometimes it's like, oh, I've gone a little way down the shame track. Okay, we need to just back this puppy up a little bit and we get back to what we did. And that's the way that's the interchange of the two tracks to be able to go, okay, what I did. Now, what do I want to do about what I did? Because here's what I did and here's why I feel bad. It's okay to process feeling bad about what you did. It's okay to feel that. It's not okay when that becomes a stick to beat yourself with in terms of that self-flagellation, because the self-flagellation is the shame spiral. And so it's like, okay, this is what I did. Let's jump on the guilt track. What am I going to do to make that better? If it's coming from somebody else, this is the point where you can, and there's a couple of things to say about this. If it's happening in the moment, what I do is if somebody says, oh, like you're this kind of person, I will often switch the language to behavior. I will acknowledge it in a behavioral sense. So it's like, I don't know, another one that I used to get called all the time was, I'm a chatterbox. You're a chatterbox.
You talk too much.
Well, so that's slightly different because you talk too much. There's a judgment in there about what is too much and what is enough and all those sorts of things. The good thing is when you meet somebody else who talks a lot, it's awesome because
we always have something to say.
We just enjoy talking. So there's again, the too much thing, that's a judgment that somebody else is putting on you.
And we're going to get into that in another episode as well.
Absolutely. And also the whole, but you talk, that's something you're doing versus you are a chatterbox. That's something that you are. So if somebody were to say to me, oh, you're a chatterbox, I would probably say, actually, I do talk quite a bit. Yeah, you're right. I would shift it to the behavior level. It's almost like that's like my little deflection shield. It's like ting, ting, ting. You throw an identity at me and I'm like, ting, here's the behavior. Oh, yeah, that's the behavior.
And it's kind of interesting being on watching this as she does it. 'Cause we do it with, like the words like the C word, we'll kind of throw it back. Well, we frame it back in, and
we'll adjust it to what somebody probably actually means
or what they're trying to say about us. But sorry, I'm all sorts of movie. Maybe now too much caffeine. I'm just hitting all the things. Watching people when she does do that language change. Some people it's just whoop over their head, but some people you get that look of awareness. They're like, I see what you did there.
I see what you did there. And then sometimes I'll be like, I wouldn't use the C word because that's a mental health cert. But I agree, that sounds like a really intense situation. And I just move the conversation on and you can see I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But there's that kind of catch. But when it comes to these kind of absolutes and identity labels, it's like, yeah, no, this is who you are. Oh, I do that. Yes. I can see that I do that. Yes. Or actually you're this and you're right. I don't do that. I will shift it into that behavior pattern. So that's what I do in the present, because obviously I'm also in my needs. I know my value. I know who I am. I know who I'm not. And just because somebody else is going to put a label on it, I'm like, very, very rarely will I take that label on. A lot of the times, and it's interesting because the thing that this kind of brings to mind is the label of ally or allyship when it comes to social justice. Anybody who knows me in that space will know I will never identify myself as that. For a start, it's not my right to do so. It's only somebody from the marginalized community that I'm supporting. If they want to describe me as that way, I will appreciate that. But to me, that's not a label, that's a verb. Mm-hmm. That is something you never get to the point where it's like, oh, check, done. You've got your little ally tag that you can stick on your chest and be like, yeah, I'm an ally now. You've never done enough, because you're only as that label is only active for as only relevant for as long as you are active. So you have to focus on the verb. So again, it's like, what am I doing? Not what am I going to label myself or what somebody else going to label me as. So the interesting thing is that sometimes what will happen is that we will have had these labels put on us in childhood. And it's obviously less easy for us to do that. So one of the things that I will often do with clients, like if we go back and we do some inner child work or we do some inner teenager work, is that we look at what are the labels. I have no idea what that noise was. No idea.
It's like whatsoever. A fog horn.
I don't think I've ever seen fog in Key West.
Oh, it's my tummy.
That was your stomach.
That first one wasn't, but that one was.
The second one was.
Fog.
I don't think I've never seen fog here.
I have, but on the water, not rolling in. I mean, we do have a lighthouse, but it's
low clouds. I've seen lots of rain. I've seen rain moving in, but actual fog, I don't know that I have. Anyway, sorry, complete sidetrack.
We'll feed my belly to make sure it doesn't
do that again. So going back to the inner child stuff, is that what I'll often end up doing is that we will end up giving that label back to the person who gave it to that person. We'll do a visualization or we'll do a process that will be like, actually that label was not about you. It was often about them. It's them trying to get their needs met by trying to get you to conform to who they want you to be, because that will meet their needs better. That's not your burden to carry. It was never your burden to carry. And so what we do is we go through a process of actually let's give that back to the person. It was a unwanted gift. Let's return it to sender. Mm-hmm. Now we're not saying we're putting it on them. We're not putting the label on there, but we're going, actually this is never about me. This is about you, especially when you're a child, because as you're a child, the people around you are responsible for meeting your needs. And those labels often compromise needs. And so that was never meant to be part of your childhood. There was maybe some support or guidance that they could have provided to help you learn about X, Y, or Z, or what have you. Z, still a Z. There was a Z the other day, but now we're back to Z. My American British transition is kind of in a wonky place right now. I'm flip flopping both sides of the pond, but yeah, like there were things maybe that, and it's not to say that all children are perfect and they don't need to learn and grow and understand different things. That's part of meeting their needs as well. Is that we provide that support, we provide that guidance. But the key thing is that the labels that get put on children are normally nothing to do with the child. It's about how the child is being judged, the expectations of the parent, the needs of the parent, and the parent trying to get the child to conform to what they want the child to be, rather than supporting the child in getting their needs met. So those labels, we want to return those to sender. They choose not to reopen them again. That's cool. They can sit on the doormat or in the mailbox and completely unopened. But the key is that they're not meant for you. Mm-hmm. They're not meant to stay with you, because again, those labels are where so many people have got shame because of the labels that were put on them as children, and because they've never been taught about this. They've never been taught about the difference between guilt and shame. And actually, there's an example I'm going to give in I don't think it's the next episode, I think it's the final episode in this series, where I'm going to talk about an interesting experience I had on a first date many years ago, where the person I was on a date with described a situation between his children, and got a bit of an education about the difference between guilt and shame, and is a great example of what it is that we're talking about today. I think that's probably it from me. Anything you want to add to this?
I got 2 more in this series, so
there's plenty still to come. Yes. So stick with us. And I'm just gonna invite you, as you are listening to this, just to notice the times in your life where you've taken a situation where you've done something or haven't done something, and where you've internalized that as being, I'm a bad person, or there's something wrong with you. And just think about those instances, and just remember, return back to what you did and see how you can get on the guilt track in terms of doing something constructive, in order that the guilt will serve its purpose, so you don't need to carry it anymore, because that is one of the biggest gifts that you can give to yourself.
I also want to add another little thing to consider in there.
Add something?
Yes. Is also be aware of the labels you were given as a child. Mm-hmm. And there a lot of shame, like Claire was saying, has been put on us from children. Mm-hmm. Like from our childhood, like not just not just the internal, but look at the external and be like, that isn't me. Like that doesn't define me.
Yes. And it's that definition that normally causes the shame, rather than here's who I have shown up as in this moment. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to show up as one thing in one moment and then another thing the next. And that's what change and learning and growth is all about. That's what life is all about.
That's what being human is about.
Mm-hmm, very much so. All right. So thank you for listening. Remember to come back and join us soon, because we will have another episode on this guilt and shame series. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. And remember, between now and next time, to keep meeting your needs. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye, friends.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard
and would like to see some of Serena's awesome facial expressions,
check out the video podcast on YouTube.
And remember, guilt is about doing something wrong. Shame is about believing there is something wrong with you. You want to do whatever you can to get back on the guilt track.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.